Christa Smith had it all planned out. Meet the right guy, get hitched, start a family. Christa figured she'd have that all checked off by the time she turned 30. But turns out she was dead wrong.
Author, international speaker, and minister Christa Smith knows what it's like to wait. Desiring to be a wife, Christa's dream wouldn't become a reality for almost 40 years. In her book, Singled Out in a Couple's World, Christa shares how we can be content while still contending for our God-given dreams.
All right, well, Christa Smith joins us now via Zoom. Christa, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, we are honored to have you. All right, well, let's start in the beginning of your journey. So your journey began after a breakup when you were just 19 years old. And you prayed a very specific prayer to the Lord, and he answered. Tell us about that.
You're so right. You know, I was 19 years old and I found myself heartbroken. And I prayed this prayer: Jesus, I give you my heart, guard it, shield it, and give it back to me when you want me to give it away, specifically in the area of marriage. It was my desire, like all the other girls around me, all the other guys around me in college. And I felt a peace, the peace of God came upon me. And that's what really began my journey of trusting God to write my story and me not writing my own story, and really allowing God to do the timeline in my life, even though it looked very different than what I thought it would look like. In that prayer at 19 years old, there was such an honest and authentic surrender that came, because truly at the end of the day, I wanted my life and I wanted my love story to be written by the Lord.
Amen. Well, you have been a part of at least 20 different weddings and in basically every capacity except bride. What was going through your mind during that time in your life?
That's a great question. And I get asked that a lot. I think when I share that, you kind of see the fear in some people's faces, like, oh my gosh, but the reality is this, I had a choice, and we always have a choice when we are around people and they are experiencing the breakthrough that we're praying for, right? And I think for me, I had that opportunity as a bridesmaid 13 times, involved in over 20 weddings, in a capacity of whether I was performing the ceremony, because I pastored for many years, and finding myself in a position where I had to choose to celebrate other people's breakthrough. And rather than frame it in such a way that their breakthrough became negative and reminded me of what I didn't have, I allowed the Lord to reframe that breakthrough, where I saw other people's breakthrough really be a promise of what God could do in my life. If he could do it in theirs, then he could certainly do it in mine. So I reframed it from a place of hope. So rather than it being like a negative experience of I was a bridesmaid 13 times, I'm like, I was able to stand with amazing friends in my life and celebrate their victory, celebrate their answer to the prayer they were believing for, and let it fuel the hope of what God could do in my story.
I love that. There's so much power in celebrating others' victories. Well, you handled singleness relatively well until you turned 35. What snapped inside of you to suddenly feel discontent?
Absolutely. At 35 years old, literally at my 35th birthday party, I'm blowing out the candles on my birthday cake. And literally as I blew out the candles, I experienced that grace that I'd previously been walking in that you mentioned. And I really was in a grace. I was in this real peace with my singleness. But at 35, I blew out the candles, and it's as though I blew out that God grace that he'd given me. But I saw such purpose in it, because the Lord allowed the grace to be lifted, because he was about to ask me a question that shifted everything. And he asked me a question with only 3 words: am I enough? And I knew exactly what he meant. You know how when the Lord asks you a question and you and him know exactly what that means? And I knew that he was asking me, Christa, if you never get married, am I enough? And I wrestled with that question for several days. And I came back honest, and I came back authentic. And that is, you're not enough, Jesus, but you need to become enough. Because even if you give me marriage, if you aren't enough, marriage won't be enough. Because we can so focus on the breakthrough and the answer to the prayer that we're believing for. But if Jesus is not your anchor point, if Jesus is not your source, nothing truly will satisfy but the Lord. And so it was for that next year and a half, from 35 to 36 and a half, that I really had to go through the process of Jesus becoming truly enough if I never got married. And I truly reached that place, but it was a journey and it was a process. The Lord allowed, as I blew out those candles at 35, for me to experience the desperation, the depth of my longing, because it's really easy to answer the question when God says, am I enough? If you have grace around you, you're like, yeah, of course you're enough. But if you actually experience the depth of your longing when asked that question, then you really have to weigh that. And that's what he allowed in his wisdom for me to weigh and really come to him in an honest, authentic place where eventually he truly became that number one in my life.
Absolutely. That is so good. Well, what advice would you give to a single person who may be watching right now who just feels stuck in this season of singleness, in this season of waiting?
For me, it's really removing the pause button off your life. I think a lot of times we don't even realize we're actually putting parts of our life, dreams and desires, things that God's put within us, we're putting them on hold because we're waiting for marriage. We're waiting for that next chapter to begin. But I think what's really important is you remove that pause button and you actually start living your life fully for God. That abandoned worship, that I'm all in for you, Jesus, taking those God risks, moving sometimes states and taking that God job, that he's opening up doors and not living from a place of fear or waiting, but really start living and pursuing what God has for you. I know I did that in my life. I encouraged so many people that I do life with as I ran schools of ministry, mentored young people. And I really saw them when they really became focused on God being the goal and not marriage. I saw them and myself live from a place of such greater fulfillment because we weren't waiting for something that we didn't really have control over, but we were waiting on God really to ordain our steps. And I really believe that as you take the pause button off your life, that's when you start living. And it really does break that boredom. It breaks that restlessness and it breaks that discontentment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about the man that God did bring into your life. His name is Sean. You say he wasn't what you were expecting. How so?
Sean, he's older than me. We come from completely different backgrounds. We're different races. We're a biracial couple. And I love our differences. And that's why I even talk about in my book, tear up that list. And that doesn't mean don't have expectations. That doesn't mean don't have desires or wants. But I think there's a healthy place we get with God where it's like, Lord, I want a man that's so going hard after you that nothing else satisfies him but you. I want a man that is all out for you, that walks in integrity, that walks in character, that is generous with his life, with his time, with his finances. Those were things that were important to me. Those were, in a sense, my non-negotiables. But as in the package in which it came, him and I had really different stories. We walked really different paths. And yet it is our differences that actually have created such a beauty in our marriage, created such a balance in our marriage. And although he came in a different package and I came in a different package for him, it really is those things that have added such a depth in our marriage. And he truly is the best man I could have asked for. No one's perfect, but I even said this in my wedding vows. He is truly perfect for me. He's truly the kindest soul. He is the most gracious man, and he is going after God. And sometimes I can barely keep up. And that's exactly what I prayed for. I wanted a marriage. I wanted a man that would be a spiritual leader in our home. And he is so easy to follow because he walks with such integrity and he walks with such a godly character. He truly has been the greatest gift of my life.
Amen. Hey, look, God knows what he's doing, and he is the best matchmaker. Well, you can get more from Christa in her brand new book. It's called Singled Out in a Couple's World. I encourage everyone to get it. It's available nationwide. Christa, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for sharing your story with the world.
Thank you so much.